Welcome back, everybody. Today we are doing jazz chords in one lesson, which is impossible to do. So here's what we're going to do. This is going to be kind of like an overview of jazz, and then we're just going to kind of narrow in little by little on a couple important points to kind of give you an idea of the way that jazz musicians look at chords and give you a couple practical exercises of, like, if you're new to jazz chords and new to jazz, here's some exercises that you could try that will start getting you down that path. Yeah, maybe we start there. So in jazz, when we're playing jazz, there's basically like two parts to it. There's the stuff that you would do with your right hand, and then there's the stuff that you would do with your left hand. And as is the case with most of the things I'm going to say today, that's an overgeneralization. The right hand is like what we would call like the soloing part or the melody part. There's a lot of instruments in jazz like trumpet and saxophone that can only play one note at a time. And so that your right hand kind of does that job if it's your turn to like show off. Okay. I put that in quotes as if that's something we say. That's something we never say and something we absolutely do. So then that would be the right hand part. And then there's like the left hand part. And the left hand kind of does two different jobs, actually. Sometimes it's playing the bass player's part. And we're going to kind of ignore that today because we're going to assume that there's a bass player. And then the other part would be the comping, playing the chords. Comping being a short for accompanying, as in accompaniment, as in playing along and not messing with the people who are playing one note and showing off at this particular moment. And in jazz, we all kind of take turns doing that, where one instrument will play the chords and the other instrument will play one note at a time or play the solo part or whatever. So that's kind of like the big generalization. So already we're not doing the soloing part this week. We're doing that next week. So today we're just going to focus on chords. Here's half of jazz, the chord part. So probably the first part that we would talk about is like how to actually build the chords, how to make the chords. And this has to do, like, if we're going to go to the language analogy, this is something like learning your alphabet or something like that. Like, here are some tools that you will eventually use, probably never in the way that you're going to practice them, but here's the actual like building blocks of what we would do in jazz. And then after that, we have to like voice the chords. So not only do you need to like play the notes, but like how you play them is important. For example, I'll just give you a real quick example here. This is what we would call a C chord. And so this is a C major chord. You've probably seen this before if you've played for piano for very long. It's a C and an E and a G. But you probably also know that you could play this C chord not as a C and an E and a G, but as a C and an E and a G. And if you've taken a class before, you probably also know that that's called an inversion, right? And so then they lie to you in music theory classes because they have to, just like I'm lying to you today, oversimplifying the stuff. And so they tell you that there's root position, first inversion, and second inversion, and then you're back to root position. That's kind of true, except that a C chord is made up of C and E and G, even if you don't play them together, clustered together. So you can play a C and an E and a G. And so this right here is a different voicing of a C chord. We are playing a C chord. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yep. Hopefully lying on purpose with a purpose. So then this would be a C chord. It's just voiced differently. In fact, if you'd like had three different instruments, you're like, all right, you play a C, and you play an E, and you play a G, and they all played their notes, that would be the chord. It'd be a C chord, it'd be a C major chord, because the C and the E and the G are getting played, even if they're not being played on the same instrument. And what's even weirder is if I play for you this, which is a C chord, right? Okay. And then I just play this note. I've kind of implied the chord. Everyone is kind of still hearing these notes right here. So if I play this, and then I play this, and then I give you some other chord like that was not what we expected. We expected to hear that right there. That's because I implied the chord. So you don't even have to necessarily be playing the notes of the chord in order for the chord to exist. That's an overview of voicing. How do you want to mix up these notes? What do you want to play? What do you want to not play in order to create different feels? Because this right here is a very different feel than that, which is a very different feel than that. Or if we go back to the Clair de Lune lesson, like that's technically a C chord too, but that sounds totally different than that, even though they're technically the same thing. Okay, anyway, so we're gonna jump more into voicing the chords here in a second, but that would be the second thing we would kind of consider. Number one would be the building the chords, then voicing the chords. We'll talk about guide tones and A-B voicings when we get there. That has to do specifically with jazz. And then the comping rhythm. So then once you have your voicing, what do you wanna do with that? Let's say this is the voicing that you're gonna use for a chord, right? So then like, how do you play it? When do you play it? You just play it once at the beginning and then hang on to it? Or do you like try to do something cool with it? Or so what rhythms are you going to use? When are you going to play them? Then we have progressions after that. This still has to do with chords and not with playing single notes. So in progressions, we talk about like, well, if this was the chord, what chord would probably follow after that? What does this chord want to go to? And then how do we like chain these chords together? And so we'll talk a little bit about progressions. And then the last thing that we would talk about would be alterations and substitutions. So like not only do you have this chord, but also if you had this chord written down, this is C major 9, you could also play this note here instead. And this one and this one are kind of interchangeable somewhat. This one here and this one here are kind of interchangeable, and you could also maybe throw in that one. So there's lots of different ways. If you see a chord, you don't necessarily have to play that chord. There's other things that are kind of implied that are kind of allowed, and that's alterations and substitutions. And that is the big 5 ideas that I would probably want to go through, probably each one of them taking a whole series of lessons on their own. We're just gonna breeze right through these. So let's go first to building chords. So for building chords, it's just a chord is just more than one note being played at the same time. As I already said, that's kind of a lie already because you don't have to be playing them in order for the chord to exist. But for the purposes of point number 1, before we learn later on that that's a lie, we're gonna say more than one note at a time. Probably 3 notes is most common, although in jazz we almost always have at least 5 notes in our chords. So, and it's just, in all cases, every other note is how we build a chord. So if you start on a C and then you play every other note, this right here, that's a chord. And if you go again, one more note, actually we're back to the C. So if we go every other note for 2 octaves, or for 7 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that right there is a chord. And you can have 6-note chord, a 5-note chord, a 4-note chord, a 3-note chord, a 2-note harmony, and a 1-note melody. Okay, cool. All right, Brian, thanks for joining us. We'll maybe catch you on the recording or something. Brian's gotta take off. So then, here we go. This is our like most obvious chord in the key of C. Every other note starting on C also doesn't sound great. What I've done for you is given you this thing right here. So this is a list of pretty much all the possible chords that you could make using these notes right here. There's alterations to them. For example, we call this the 1, the 3, the 5, or the 7. And so if this one's the 7 right here, we could alter this one by lowering it. So now this is a different chord. It's still a C something, but it's not the same C something as that one right there. So if we can alter the 7 by lowering it if we want. Now, here's the tricky part. There's a limited number of alterations to each one of these notes. Because, for example, if you take this note, which we just called the 7, and you take it up instead of taking it down, well, now we've just taken it up to the C. So now it's no longer the 7, it's just a C. So our only options for the 7 are to play the one that shows up naturally in the major scale, or to play the lowered one, which is frequently, when we're talking about the 7, called dominant. You don't have to remember that. But we have the regular one, the raised one, or the lowered one, like a light switch up or down, on or off, raised or lowered. There's no normal, I guess. Okay, so that's just the 7 by itself. If we go down one more half step and alter it even further, now we've landed on an entirely different note. And so this one is the 6 or the 13, depending on how you see it. If you want to see it as the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, that A is a 13. However, if you play it instead of the 7, it's sometimes called the 6. But the 6 and the 13 are the same thing. Okay, so we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit and losing some people along the way. The basic concept is there's a lot of alterations you can make, because you can alter the 13, you can alter the 11, you can alter the 9, you can alter the 7, you can alter the 5, you can alter the 3, and you can't alter the 1, otherwise it's no longer a C chord. So anyway, lots of alterations, lots of combinations. This guide will help you get all of the up to 4 note chords. In fact, there's, yep, there are 13s in here. So then let's say, for example, you wanted a C, I don't know, let's say you saw this thing right here. Right, so C delta 9, C triangle 9, also known as C major 9. So then the way you would compose that chord is by playing the 1, the 3, the 5, the 7, and then the 9. Bam, there you go. The letters for that would be C, E, G, B, D. And so that's kind of how you're going to use this thing is whatever chord you're wanting to build, you play those numbers, and then these next 2 columns are just examples. So if this was a C, it'd be C, E, G, B, D. I didn't write it out for every single chord, otherwise this would be lots and lots of pages, because you could have a C major 9, or you can have an F major 9. Or you can have a G major 9, or you can have an anything major 9. There's 12 different options. So I only wrote out the examples in C, but I told you how to build them over there on the left side. So that's kind of how you put together the chords. Let's do one more, maybe a little bit trickier. Let's do this thing right here. So if you see this right here, minor 7 with a flat 5, that's the same thing as a circle with a line through it, which is called half diminished. So half diminished is the exact same thing as minor 7 flat 5. In jazz, sometimes you'll see a C minor 7 flat 5, and sometimes you'll see a C half diminished, or C with a circle with a line through it. Same exact thing. And that the way that is built is you play the 1, and then you play the 3, but instead of playing a regular 3, you play the flat 3, which is why it says lowercase b3 right there. The lowercase b means flat. So flat 3, and then the 5, instead of playing a regular 5, you'd play a flat 5, and then the 7, instead of a regular 7, you'd play the flat 7. Those are the notes, and as you can see over here, the examples would be C minor 7 flat 5, or C half diminished, and those notes would be C, E flat, G flat. Yikes. Randomly picked the one that was wrong there. So, and then B flat at the top. So this would be a C minor 7 flat 5, or a C half diminished. Cool, and if you're in the archives, hopefully that is already fixed there for you with that G flat in there. That's how you use this, and up here at the top is the legend, which tells you what each of those things means, as we just talked about over here. A lowercase b means flat. All right, so that's how chords are put together. So if you were like looking at a song, a jazz song, and it had, you know, C minor 7 flat 5, you could go to that chart and figure out exactly what notes you were supposed to play. But of course, that brings up the next thing, which is, what about the voicings of these chords? Like, is that the right way to play a C minor 7 flat 5? And the answer is, of course, I don't know. There's no right way to play it. There's no wrong way to play it. Those are the notes for the C minor 7 flat 5. But the 2 things that we're going to talk about today are the guide tones and the A and B voicings, because those are kind of going to get you through. They're going to help you survive as a faux jazz musician. In other words, professionals and beginners both play guide tones. Professionals and beginners both play A and B voicings. So if you learn these, at least people won't know if you're a beginner or if you're a pro from the way that you comp. And that's what you're going for at the beginning. So then guide tones, let's do a different one. Actually, I want to use a C minor 7. And then, oh, I also give you this one here. So this is just straight up, like, don't worry about any of the theory of like having to do the 1, the flat 3, the flat 5. This is just the thing that I said I didn't print out for all of the chords. I did print out for all the most common ones. So major 7 chords, minor major 7 chords, minor 7 chords, dominant 7 chords, fully diminished chords, and half diminished chords, which are not all the chords that there are. Last I checked, I think there's 144 different types of C chords. And there's 144 different types of C sharp chords. Okay, so then they're not all written out, but here are the 6 most common types of chords: major 7, major 7, minor 7. Anyway, so what we want to go to is this one right here. I'm going to go with a C minor 7. And these are just the 1, 3, 5, and 7. It doesn't include the 9. So if I had a C minor 7, I'd play C, E flat, G, and B flat. I'm going to go ahead and throw the 9 on there, which would be a D. Actually, let's go prove it on the next page. So a C minor 9 right here is the next one over from what we just did. So it'd be the 1, the flat 3, the 5, the flat 7, and the 9. It would be called a C minor 9, and the notes would be C, E flat, G, B flat, and D. There we go. That's our C minor 9, or our C minor 7, 9, but probably just C minor 9 is a better way to say that. So then, there's 2 important notes in this chord, 2 most important notes in this chord. They're the same most important notes as every chord, and that is the 3 and the 7. This is the 3, and this is the 7. So let me tell you why here a little bit. First of all, the 9 is super colory. It's like the first color tone that we have. It doesn't really, it's not like a bass part of the chord. It's kind of like a decoration on top. So if you take the 9 and you alter it a little bit, it doesn't change the chord. What's another way of saying that? It's going to be changed around more frequently than these ones right here. This is kind of the bass chord, 1, 3, 5, 7, and then we always throw on a decoration note, at least one of them. Okay, so then just trust me, the 9 isn't as important because it's kind of decorative. Cool. The 1, I'm going to say this one isn't important because it's so important it's implied. Like, it's a C chord, it's the most important note that there is, and your bass player is probably already playing it. So you're not going to usually play the root of the chord, but the 1 is implied as like, well, that's the most important thing. So that's not going to be the most important note. It's required. None of the rest of these notes are required. You could have a chord that has these notes right here. This is also a type of a C chord, and it doesn't have any of the same notes. So these are the ones that tell us what kind of C chord it is. There we go. So then, except for the 1, which is implied, the 9 isn't most important because it's kind of decorative, and so then we're left with these 3 notes. Now, the 5 is the least likely to be changed around. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. If you raise the 5, it's an augmented chord. And if you know much about chords, you know you probably haven't heard of augmented chords because you don't run into them very frequently. If you have played them, then you know how infrequently you have played them. And then the other one is if you lower the 5, then you have a flat 5 chord, which is usually some kind of diminished chord. And if you played diminished chords, you also know how infrequently those show up as well. Almost everything is some version of a major chord or some version of a minor chord, which both have just this regular 5 in there. So the 5 is pretty stable. It's pretty much implied when we play the root. So we don't need the root in our chord because it's already there. It is the foundation of the chord. And then we don't really need the 9. It's not the most important note because it's pretty decorative. The 5 is pretty much implied from the root. So that leaves us the 3 and the 7. And the 3 and the 7, man, that was a long way of saying the 3 and the 7 are the guide tones. That's what guide tones is. It's the 3 and the 7. They're the most important notes because the 3 tells us this C chord that I have, is it major or is it minor? If it's a major, then that's going to be a very, very different chord than if it's a minor. Minor is going to have like a whole other foundational feel, and the 9 isn't going to be able to change any of that. That's going to be super happy and majory, and this one is going to be pretty dark. And so no matter what I do with a 9, it's not going to foundationally change the major or minor feel. That's the most important part. After the major minor feel, the question is this a like an ending place chord, or is this a chord that is implying motion? Is this going somewhere? Am I supposed to feel settled or not? So if I've got a C major chord, if I've got this chord right here, then things are pretty much settled. Like, this is probably the end of the song or the beginning of the song, or this is some place of rest, right? It doesn't really want to go anywhere. However, if I have the same chord and I just lower the 7, this turns into what we call dominant. And this is arguably the foundation of jazz, arguably the foundation of music. I've heard that argument before. This is the thing that creates motion. This is the thing that makes you want to go somewhere. This is what allows you to tell a musical story, is this thing right here, this motion, this dominant chord. So it's a major chord, but right here, this is saying, oh, we're going to go somewhere. And somewhere that we're going to go is to there. And when I play it like that, you can probably feel, oh yeah, that dominant chord wants to resolve into this thing. And this thing right here would probably have the not dominant 7 on it. 1, 3, 5, 7. So this thing right here. Resolution. So motion, resolution. So the 7's super important because it's telling us where we are in the story. This tells us, the 3 tells us what kind of story is it, and the 7 tells us, are we at resolution or are we at motion? So the 3 and the 7 are the most important notes of any chord, and so they're called the guide tones. They guide us on our journey here. And so you can get away with only playing the 3 and the 7 of chords for like just as comping. Just that is your voicing, is the 3 and the 7. In fact, there are lots of great jazz musicians that are known for just playing the 3 and the 7 and leaving out the 5 and the 9 and the extensions and all that stuff. So just the 3 and the 7. So what I would say is, if we go back to building the chords, maybe practice building your chords, like, just pick any random letter and then pick any random extension and then try to build it. Let me say that a different way. Maybe just pick any random letter. You can go through the circle of fifths if you want. You can just go through chromatically, one note at a time. You could go however you just pick them at random. I'm going to play that one, and I'm going to play eeny, meeny, miny, mo, a minor 7 chord. So it's going to be an E minor 7 chord, and then without looking, try to see if you can figure out how that E minor 7 chord is going to go. If you need to look, then look. That's exercise number 1, is just to get used to major 7, minor 7, dominant, fully diminished, and half diminished chords, and maybe minor major 7s off of all of the possible roots. E flat, D flat, C, B. And then those chords that are built on those. And then the next thing you would do is the voicings for each of those. So after you've got it down and you're like, okay, so that's an E minor 7, I can do that. Then practice thinking, okay, E minor 7, and then just playing the guide tones of it. Just the 3 and the 7, without the 1 and the 5. Okay, so that's guide tones. Now let's talk A and B voicings. This might be a long lesson. Okay, so to review, so far we've talked about building chords. We got all these jazz chords. How do we make them? You've got the charts. You've got the instructions, flat, what to flat and what to raise, all that stuff. Then voicing the chords. The 3 and the 7 are the most important thing. You can get away with playing those. Actually, guide tones, for some people like me, are more difficult at the beginning than just playing the full-on chord. Because first you got to think, okay, I don't know. First, I've got to think, okay, I've got an E, and then it's going to be a minor 7 chord, and then wait, I don't want to play the 1 or the 5, so that means don't play that and don't play that. It's extra steps. It's easier just to play the full chord, because taking notes out is an extra step. So in the chat, Chopin, yes, actually we have Chopin. We have 3 lessons dedicated to several Chopin songs coming up in a few weeks. Today is just jazz chords. So then an A and B voicing. So let's do this. Like I said before, we usually include the 9s in these chords. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the C, just so everyone's on the same page. We have the 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And we almost always play the 3, the 5, the 7, and the 9, and we almost always leave the 1 out, either for our left hand to play or for our bass player to play, if there's a bass player. If there is a bass player, don't be playing the roots of the chords down here. All you need is the 3, the 5, the 7, the 9. That way we're not duplicating notes that some other instrument's trying to play. Okay, cool. So actually, this is an A voicing. Cool. So just the 3, the 5, the 7, the 9. Now, this is a little bit more difficult than playing the straight up chord because you've got the root in there. So once again, you have to think, okay, so it's a C chord without a C. So play the C chord in your mind and then don't play the C. If you want to, play this down here, but this right here is significantly different, at least for me, mentally, than playing this right here. So this right here is like, you've got a bass player and then a chord player, and the chord player is playing this A voicing. So that is A voicings. So you would do that again through all of the chords you were doing before. So you play, your E minor 7, and then you try just the guide tones, and then you try the A voicing, which is 3, 5, 7, and 9, which includes a note that you didn't have in your guide tones because you were just playing the 3 and the 7. Okay, hopefully we're all still together for this. So we've got, or maybe you've left because you already have something to practice. You need to work on, building chords, and that's fine too. 3, 5, 7, 9. There we go. So then that's the A voicing. The B voicing is just take the top 2 notes, and take them down an octave, this D and F sharp, play that D and F sharp down there, and this is another really popular way of playing an E minor 7 or an E minor 9 chord. You've got the 7, the 9, and the 3, and the 5. That is what a B voicing is. So we've got an A voicing, and we've got a B voicing. So then if we were going to do like all of these together in an exercise, we'd think I don't know, minor 7. Okay, how do you do that? Well, it's an E minor 7 like that. Okay, cool. So that's my chord. I built it. Hooray. Now my voicing is going to be just the guide tones, and then just the A voicing, and then just the B voicing. 1 down. Next, E flat minor 7. That's my chord. Those are my guide tones. That's my A voicing. That's my B voicing. Yeah, it'll take some time. There's a lot to practice here. But if you're new to chords, it should take time for you to go from I don't know anything about jazz to I'm an expert jazz player. That should take more than like a day or 2 or 5. Okay, cool. So then that's going to be our exercise, A and B voicings. That's the 3, 5, 7, 9 or the 7, 9, 3, 5. I'll also show you this cheat that I have when I was first learning my A and B voicings. I did them entirely differently. Instead of thinking about the A voicing and then taking the top 2 notes and putting them on the bottom, or you could do the other way, which is take the bottom 2 notes and put them on top. Either way, you end up with the B voicing. What I did instead was I just played the triad, the 3-note chord. So if I was going to have a C, a major 9 chord, which is all of those, and I was going to try to do a B voicing, all I would do is imagine in my head that the root of the chord exploded and burst out from there to the 2 notes next to it. And you automatically come up with the 7 and the 9. So if this is the root, you just blow it up, explode it. There's all the shrapnel, the 7 and the 9 are there, and then I still have my 3 and my 5 from here. So this right here is the B voicing of a C major 9 chord. And all I did was think about a regular C chord and explode the root. So then if we did that on some other chord, like that E flat minor 7. So in this case, I have to know that the explosion is going to go down a whole step and up a whole step for minor 7 because of that chord chart thing. Okay, so that's going to be important. So then I take this note right here. This is my triad, my 1, 3, and 5. I explode this guy right here, and it ends up right there. And that is my B voicing for an E flat minor 7 or an E flat minor 9. Okay, so that's A voicings and B voicings and guide tones and voicings and building chords. We're on to sections 3, 4, and 5. This is a ton of information, so feel free to take off whenever you need to practice this stuff. This recording will be here for, however long the internet exists or the world exists, a week or something from what the news says we should be around. So then number 3 is comping rhythms. So then there's a lot right here that is just kind of improvisational, like what sounds good, what feels good. That's one option. It's just kind of stab in chords if you want to do your E flat major or E flat minor 9 chord. I'm not really thinking about anything right here except like how do I make it stabby and erratic, perhaps, or less. Now, for a lot of people, especially people coming from a classical background, the instructions of, just trying to make it stabby is a really irritating instruction. So I'm going to be a little more specific here. There are some really popular rhythms. Some of the most popular ones are 2 eighth notes together. So then 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and. And you can put these on any beat. So you can put it on 1 and, or you can put it on 2. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So that sounds cool. So just 2 eighth notes right next to each other. You can do it on a beat 3. You can do it on beat 4. You can actually do it on the ands. So you could do like and 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can experiment with just 2 eighth notes, putting them anywhere, and you could go through the whole entire song. So 1, 2, 3, So that would be some song just playing through the different chords, but playing one and on each one of them. Okay, cool. So that's one of them that we're going to use. And then the other one that we're going to use is a dotted quarter and an eighth note. By the way, the first one is something that I would call, well, I'm stealing this, I believe I'm stealing this from Dr. Joe Gilman, who call that a C-Jam Blues, because there's a song called C-Jam Blues that goes. So that one, that rhythm right there, just 2 eighth notes right next to each other, kind of a rhythm that is stolen from C-Jam Blues, although I'm sure there's a ton of songs before C-Jam Blues that use 2 eighth notes together, like every song ever. Okay, so anyway, 2 eighth notes. So this next one would be called Killer Joe from the song Killer Joe. And so then this is a dotted quarter and then an eighth. So in other words, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and, or the C-Jam, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Okay, so there are some ideas of either just like kind of go with it and see what feels right. Try 2 eighth notes, try a quarter note with a dotted quarter with an eighth. And then the most important one is just listen to a whole bunch of recordings and then try to notice what do they do. What is the piano player, when the saxophone player or the trumpet player is playing their individual notes behind them, what is the piano player playing? What kinds of rhythms are they using? And then try to copy that stuff, because that's going to be more important than any of this stuff that you use your brain for, because they're just going based on what their artistic genius says. Okay, so try to steal wherever possible. 2 more things here, and these might go a little bit faster, actually. So this is progressions and alterations and substitutions. So progressions, what you need to know is that jazz is largely built on something called the circle of fifths. Arguably, all music is largely grounded in the circle of fifths. Arguably, all motion in auditory art has something to do with the circle of fifths. I don't think I like that last argument. But anyway, it's really super important. We at least can all agree on that, especially to Western music. So the circle of fifths is, moving on here, this thing right here. I've got like multiple hour lessons on just the circle of fifths and what it can do, and that just barely scratches the surface. This is a huge topic, but know that C's like to go to F's, and F's like to go to B flats, and B flats like to go to E flats, and E flats like to go to A flats, and A flats like to go to D flats. And this thing is important enough that a lot of people use this to practice, because if you go all the way around the circle and you come back around to C, you've played all 12 notes. So C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. That is all 12 notes, just spread out more in the circle of fifths. Cool. I'm going to try to not turn this into a circle of fifths lesson, but there's lots of them. You want to go check one of those out if this is interesting to you, and you want to know why they're stuck together this way. Okay, so then that a lot of people do that. So they'll, for example, if we were to apply this to the first thing, the building chords thing. So then we'd go, okay, well, I'm going to try to build all major 7 chords. So I'm going to play major 7 chords through the circle of fifths. C major 7, F major 7, B flat major 7, E flat major 7, A flat major 7. And I'm guessing that there's at least 37 people who right now were like, wait, I've heard that song before. Yeah, it is every song. It's every song out there. Not necessarily all those chords in that order, but it feels familiar because it's extremely, extremely familiar. So anyway, there's one way to get through all 12 keys, and you're going through it also utilizing the circle of fifths. It's going to show up a zillion million times, and that nobody wants to memorize. So practicing with the circle of fifths kind of like kills 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay, so use it to practice, but also know that the chords frequently do go in that order. So if you practice your chords in that order, you would be accidentally practicing the order of jazz chords the way that they typically go. I'm going to go out on a limb here that I definitely should not go out on. This cannot hold my weight. But I'm going to say that something like 60 to 70% of all jazz chords, jazz chord movements, are the circle of fifths. So in other words, if you're on a C chord, I'm going to guess there's like a 60 to 70% chance that the next chord after that is some version of an F chord. And there's like a 60 to 70% chance that the next chord after that is some kind of B flat chord. Even though you got like 11 different options you could go to after a C chord. More than that, actually. 12 times 144, whatever that is. That's how many different options you could have for what kind of chord you're going to go to. But there's like a 60 or 70% chance that you're going to go to some type of F chord after that. And so this motion of C to F to B flat is so common that it's got its own designation. It's called a 2-5-1. And I believe, yeah, right here. This right here, 2-5-1. Oh, bummer. Okay, so this is 1-2-5. Okay, so we're gonna use this chart right here, even though it's almost perfectly what I want, and so it's so irritatingly not. So then a 2-5-1 in the key of C would be the 2 would be D minor. Maybe you can't see that. I'll go in here. So this is a 2-5-1, right, in the key of C. And so that leaves us right here, a 2-5-1 in the key of C. The 2 would be D minor, the 5 would be G, and then the 1 would be C. So we would play a D minor, or D minor 7, or D minor 9, to a G, to a C. And that is, if we scroll down to the circle of fifths, you'll notice that is, of course, exactly what the circle of fifths would predict, that a D is going to go to a G, which is going to go to a C. Okay, so it's 3 movements in the circle of fifths, minor to major, or minor 7 to dominant to major 7, if we're practicing them as 7 chords, as jazz chords. So then the reason this is called a turnaround is this is usually what's used frequently at the end of songs in order to get back to the beginning. So if you end a song on C and you want to turn around, you want to get back to the beginning of the song, then what you would use is right here, this turnaround, which is you're on the C, you play a D minor and then a G, and then you're ready to go back into C again. So playing these chords in this order, and I'll go ahead and write this in for you because this one in particular is important enough that you should have this. D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. That's a 2-5-1 or a 1-2-5, depending on if you're playing it as a turnaround or just practicing the motions, which if I were you, I would just practice the motions, a 2 to a 5 to a 1, and then move on to the key of F. And a 2-5-1 in the key of F would be a G minor 7 to C7 to F major 7. Trust me? No, don't trust me. 2-5-1, G minor 7 would be the 2, C7 would be the 5, and F major 7 would be the 1. 2-5-1. Okay, cool. So then 2-5-1s in every key. Seriously, if you have done no jazz before and you practice the 2-5-1s in every key using the 7s and the 9s, using A and B voicings, using guide tones, I mean, you're hireable in a lot of cases. So, yeah, that would be incredible. But of course, the goal here is just take one little bit that makes sense and go for it. The goal is not to get to hireable, unless that's your goal. Whatever your goal is, go for it. Then the last thing would be alterations and substitutions, and this is one that we're just going to kind of talk about because I've got dozens of lessons on reharmonization and alterations to chords and substitutions, stuff like that. But just to kind of review back where we were before, do know that the 9 and the 11 and the 13. These are what we frequently call the color tones, and they are the most malleable, I would say, of the extensions. So, or yeah, of the notes. So then, if you see, for example, a D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7, like we were playing that 2-5-1 from a second ago, you might recognize that. D minor 7, G7 to C. Well, we can alter, for example, on this one, on this chord right here, instead of having the 3, the 5, the 7, and the 9, we can alter the 9 to be a flat 9. And then we have this. Right? And like I said before, you could, you know, in some chords you can like change the 7 and the 6 around, play a 6. So that is very, very much like the original thing that we played. So there's lots of alterations and substitutions where, like, if you see a G7, depending on the context, you don't necessarily have to play this 9. You can play around with like maybe a flat 9 or maybe even a sharp 9. So there's lots of different ways that we can alter and substitute chords in the same way that, like, you know, if you see someone on the street, like, what are you supposed to say? Well, you're supposed to say hello, unless you say hey, or you say, hey, what's up? Or you, oh, I said hey again. Or you say, yo. Like, there's lots of ways. They all mean the same thing. A G7 and a G7 flat 9 kind of mean the same thing depending on what the context is. In a lot of cases, you would use both of them. So you'd go regular 9, flat 9, to C, 7 and 6. So there's a lot of that stuff going on in jazz too, where it's like, oh, but I learned this chord, but jazz musicians don't really like following rules very much. And so a lot of times, even though it's like that chord, we kind of mess around and we alter chords and we substitute them. So while you're working on all this stuff, it's really super important, but just know that especially on the extensions, the 7, but especially the 9, the 11, and the 13, wherever those are included, there's lots of substitutions and fudginess going on. So the most important thing is get those guide tones down, because the 3 and the 7 are rarely substitutable. Yeah, that's another lie, but I'm going to go with it for now. They're going to be the ones that stay the same the most frequently. Okay, cool. Other than that, man, if you didn't learn anything in there, then you're probably already a jazz musician, and I don't know why you came to this lesson. But if there was something in there, it's likely that there's something in there that you're like, oh, wait, I want to do more of that, but then you moved on to the next thing too fast. So if that's the case, then let me know, because I do want to go back and work on any of the stuff that was interesting to you. But that's kind of an overview of how jazz musicians look at and use and build chords. And then next week, we're going to get into the solos, the single note stuff, and kind of do the same-ish overview of like, well, how do you approach playing individual notes? How do you improvise? Stuff like that. You're not going to learn, you won't be an improviser by the time we get done, but at least you'll have kind of the jazz perspective of how we approach that stuff. So hopefully that was helpful to you. If not, then move on to another lesson. Reach out, let me know what was interesting, what you wish I was doing. Someone here wishes that we were doing Chopin this week, so we will do that very soon. Let me know. Till next time, go explore, mess up, have fun, rock on, friends.